Hello, I wish I could be there to present. I'm currently at the Digital Humanities Conference in Montreal and couldn't even quite swing making the drive there. I just have a few things to say about the exclusion primarily of women writers from 18th century Miscellanies to the present, even in digital media, though luckily not nines. Roger Lonsdale first published 18th century women poets around 1989, and his introduction says that people always asked him, were there any 18th century women poets? And I'll just give you a little run through of the table of contents of this edition. So you can see there were a few. The first anthology of women writers, I believe, was, except for some miscellanies which occurred earlier in the 18th century, was Alexander Dyce's Specimens of British Poetesses. And the curious thing about it is that it characterizes itself as finding women writers by chasing through jungles of forgotten literature. So he says immediately all the women here are forgotten. And of course, one of the women he catalogs, and this is 1825, is Felicia Hemans. And at that moment in time, she was probably one of the highest paid authors in Great Britain. Paula Feldman's The Poet and the Prophets article from 1997 shows this. So hardly forgotten at the time that Dyce was publishing, she just got coded that way by his anthology. I've written about this in Misogynist Economies and an essay called Putting Contents on the Table. An example is that there are two collections by Robert Southey, the Specimens of the Later English Poets, which is very miscellaneous and claims to find only historical curiosities, and the Select Works of the British Poets, which claims to be disciplinary, sketching out the great poets of English literature. The 1807 Specimens includes women who are historical curiosities, and of course the 1831 anthology does not. So at the very inception of collecting women poets, they were coded as not great literature, of collecting poets. So what has changed since that time, the early 19th century, when people began to create the discipline of English literature and organize its canon? What has changed in the world of the digital? Well, unfortunately, not much. My research assistant, Nigel Lepianka, actually tracked how many women and men writers are in Ebo and Echo collectively. And you can see the results in those charts. There's only 7% if you just count each author uniquely, if you count all of the writings. So in other words, authors listed multiple times, only about 4% are women. But you'd think, well, we're going to right those wrongs of collecting, of archiving, which Ebo and Echo reflect. Chadwick Healy launched very early in the 90s something that they called the English Poetry Database, and indeed claim it is the most comprehensive electronic archive. It was based upon the New Cambridge Bibliography of English Literature. Even though this was marketed as a brand new resource, it was based on research from 1968, and in fact, the editor of the 18th century volume of the NCBEL was a known misogynist. That means that very little women's poetry was initially included. They've since corrected that a bit, but still, it's very low. It certainly doesn't take account of Lonsdale's extensive introduction. Margaret Ezell has written very powerfully about how the predilection for digitizing printed texts, in fact, excludes a lot of women's writing which circulated in manuscript. A project that is designed to rectify the situation is ReCirc, about the reception and circulation of early modern women's writing. It's a project at Galloway. And here's an example of the kinds of wrongs that they are archival wrongs, archival gender bias that they are trying to correct. There's a martyr, Catholic martyr, Sir Thomas Felton, who his life was preserved and received into the records by a manuscript written by his sister, Mrs. Salisbury. But when you go to the DNB, not only do you not hear anything about her writing of this material from which all of our knowledge is derived, all it says is Sir Thomas Felton had a sister and doesn't name her. I want to thank Marie-Louise Culhan for this information and this slide. And here she is. She's the principal investigator of ReCirc. It will have a database available of women's writing in manuscript and other kinds of things. That will be available in the next couple of years. But if you go to the ReCirc blog, you will be able to see some of the kinds of work that can be done because they are using the database as they're building it. This is an impressive blog about visualizing some of the data that's available, and in it you can see glimpses of the database, not with its interface that will be public, but behind the scenes kind of, and see all the poems by women that are being retrieved in manuscript miscellanies. It's just an amazing project. The Orlando Project and the Women Writers Project are amazing also at retrieving women writers and writing archival wrongs through what they're doing. Jackie Wernemont has asked, though, is the mere presence, the fact of being there, of having women's work exist in digital archives enough to address the continued marginalization of women's writing? I'm not sure it is. I have argued, though, in an essay in the Blackwell Companion, the new Blackwell Companion to Digital Humanities, that there is a kind of systematic and willful blindness. It doesn't matter that it's unconscious, it's still willful. That's the thing about the unconscious. It makes you do things that you can only decide whether you really want to do if they're made conscious. Here's 18th Connect, which is the sister organization for Nines. And unlike those anthologies and Chadwick-Healy databases, if we go to 18th Connect and search for Barbeau, we can see that there are all kinds of resources. 421 results for Anna Barbeau, beginning with this. You can see that there are journals in JSTOR, things from there. There are peer-reviewed projects that collect Barbeau's work, my own Poetess Archive, proprietary digital collections, ECHO, English short title catalog, even various libraries like the University, actually I think the University of Pennsylvania is the Celebration of Women, but all kinds of impressive resources gathered together here so that you can find out what's been digitized of Barbeau's works. Thank you.